Hello, everyone, and welcome to Integral Live. My name is Corey DeVos. I am the editor-in-chief of integrallife.com, and I am just so happy that you all could join us. And I'm also very happy to welcome my good friend, Jeff Salzman, who's beginning a full week of Daily Evolver Live episodes every day this week at 1 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. Before we begin, I wanted to mention a couple quick housekeeping notes. If you have a question or comment that you'd like to share with Jeff during the show, you'll need to join the discussion using the actual Zoom app. So if you're watching right now on the integrallife.com/live page, you should see a link beneath the video player to join. And join using your computer or your smartphone or just about any other mobile device. It's really easy and simple to join the actual conversation. And the nice thing is we get to see your face and hear your voice, and that's always great. We're trying to make these Integral Live presentations as interactive and as conversational as possible. So we definitely invite you to let us know if you've got something to say. And once you're on the app, if you do have a question or comment, all you need to do is either click the raise your hand button, which will let Jeff know that you've got something to say, or you can click the Q&A button and ask your question directly through there. Jeff will then bring you into the discussion and you can ask your question to him directly. So without any more delay, welcome to the Daily Evolver on Integral Live with my good friend, Jeff Salzman. Jeff, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing good. Good
Awesome.
to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you.
Yeah, I think my voice is a little breaking up, but I'll get in the groove here.
Oh, you're so great.
Welcome everybody. Now that ding dong, was that anything I need to worry about?
I don't think so. Okay,
good. It's good to be here, and as you can see, we're kind of working out the kinks in this, but this has been a fantasy of mine for a long time. I named the Daily Evolver for a reason, and that was I always wanted to just, be able to comment in real time on the stuff that I'm absorbing and thinking integral thoughts about on a good day. And so this is a chance for me to experiment with that. It's just an experiment. We're going to do it this week and reevaluate, but it feels good to be here. As I mentioned in one of the promos for this 5-day thing, that one of the great fruits of evolution is that the fruits of integral consciousness is that we realize evolution, we feel evolution. We feel that procreant urge that Walt Whitman talked about, always the procreant urge, he said. And we feel it in ourselves, we feel it in other people, we feel it in the whole of the cosmos that had a start 13.8 billion years ago. And, atoms have turned into this, have turned into us. And there's, no reason to think that's not going to continue. And as we look at the large trajectory of this evolution, we see that it is a generator of ever more goodness, truth, and beauty. And again, we can see that in ourselves, we can see that in other people, and we can see that in the world. The problem with that is the fine print is that evolution, while beautiful, is not pretty. And while true, it is often attended by lies. And while good, it is often arises in something that we see as bad. And that is, just part of the strange beauty of the whole thing. And of course, it brings us to the only topic that we could ever talk about, Donald Trump, who has become apparently the president of the United States of America. And that's something I have to rewrap my head around every morning, but I do, because I'm a good citizen. Of course, I've talked a lot about this on the Daily Evolver. And I have made the case that Trump is operating, in my view, at least in the moral line of development, at a stage that we would call egocentric. And it is a stage that is perfectly appropriate for a 3 to 5-year-old, but becomes problematic as, you know, people are arrested there and keep aging. So, so what I wanted to talk about actually is not Trump so much per se, but this whole idea of being arrested at certain stages of development and how pathologies can sort of come online there. And I want to look at an article that I read that has really helped me to understand people better and Trump better also actually. And it's an article that's called When Your Child is a Psychopath. And it's about psychopathology in children. And I'm actually not saying that Trump's a psychopath. In fact, after having read this, I don't think he is necessarily. But, you know, part of this understanding that we're gaining at warp speed in terms of, you know, turning up the Google map on people and seeing all of these various spectrum that people are on and understanding them and seeing them as people having I-thou relationships with them rather than I-it relationships. That it turns out that for psychopathic children, I-thou relationships are actually very important, that we have them with them. They don't have them with other people, but it's one of the ways that we get through, and I'll get to that in a second. But first, I do want to point out that the good old Onion had this nailed, I guess 7 years ago in a major article that they released that I loved. New study reveals most children are unrepentant sociopaths. And I'll read it, it's from The Onion. A study published Monday in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry has concluded that an estimated 98% of children under the age of 10 are remorseless sociopaths with little regard for anything other than their own egocentric interests and pleasures. According to Dr. Leonard Matteo, developmental psychologist at the University of Minnesota and lead author of the study, most adults are completely unaware that they could be living among callous monsters who would remorselessly exploit them to obtain something as insignificant as an ice cream cone or a new toy. And then one last paragraph. The depth of depravity that these tiny psychopaths are capable of reaching are quite chilling, Matteo added. So anyway, there's some truth to that. You know, I mean, we grow up, we move, part of one of the ways of looking at development, you know, we talk about stages and colors and all of that, but one of the ways is simply moving from egocentric, where my world is me. If mommy and daddy fight, it's my fault. If this happens, it's my fault. It's just getting your sort of ego together. And then there's an ethnocentric, where I begin to identify with an ever larger circle of mommy and daddy and grandma and school and community and nation. And then there's world-centric, which we see comes on in the postmodern stage of development. And then there's cosmocentric, which is the stage that begins to feel into, as I was talking about before, the animating energetics of the cosmos, this updraft of the cosmos that's, you know, beyond this world, actually. So, so I don't know where I was going with that, but I do want to get back to this psychopath story because it's really interesting, and it really helped me to understand even this idea of evil, because some of these kids really basically would qualify in sort of traditional terms. And I'm not going to read the whole article by any means, but I want to read a few passages. And they're talking about this one girl, Samantha, who is in this program in Austin, Texas, called the Matteo program, that's been very successful in treating childhood psychopathy. And actually, I do want to point out that they, let me just jump to this part. It says, researchers shy away from calling children psychopaths. The term carries too much stigma and too much determinism. They prefer to describe children like Samantha as having, quote, callous and unemotional traits, a lack of empathy, which is shorthand for a cluster of characteristics and behaviors that include remorse, a lack of remorse or guilt, shallow emotions, aggression and even cruelty, and a seeming indifference to punishment. Callous and unemotional children have no trouble hurting others to get what they want. If they do seem caring or empathetic, they're probably trying to manipulate you. So this is the Samantha, 6 years old. She started drawing pictures of murder weapons, a knife, a bow, chemicals for poisoning, a plastic bag for suffocating. And this is at age 6. She tells the interviewer that she pretended to kill her stuffed animal. She's now an 11-year-old. So the interviewer asks, "You were practicing on your stuffed animals?" She nods. "How did you feel when you were doing that to your stuffed animals?" "Happy." "Why did it make you feel happy?" "Because I thought someday I was going to be able to do that to a real person." And it turns out she did. She was caught trying to strangle her younger brothers and sisters, and she had a bunch of them, to the point where, well, here's one situation where her mother caught her strangling her 2-month-old brother. And the mother says, "What were you doing?" And Samantha says, "I was trying to choke him." "You realize you would have killed him. He would not have been able to breathe. He would have died." Samantha answers, "I know." The mother, "What about the rest of us?" Samantha says, "I want to kill you all." And this is when they, started all kinds of treatments and ended up at this Mateo Center, which has been, by their estimation, remarkably effective in helping their daughter. Now, there's a story about Carl, who is now an adult, and he was a child. He reports this. He said, "I remember when I bit my mother really hard and she was bleeding and crying. I remember feeling so happy, so overjoyed, completely fulfilled and satisfied. It wasn't like somebody kicked me in the face and I was trying to get him back. It was more like a weird, hard to explain feeling of hatred." That's a kid. And, that's news to me. I didn't know there were kids who are that way, felt that way. So let me go on. They say about 1% of children have these traits. 4 out of 5 of them grow up to be functional adults, although you probably wouldn't want your kid to marry one. But the mystery is, this is an interesting thing. The mystery is, and I'll just read it verbatim. The mystery, the one everyone is trying to solve, is why some of these children develop into normal adults while others end up on death row. And I often think of Ken Wilber talking to us about development, where he would just point out that nobody knows why people grow. Some people stop their development roughly at a traditional stage, a modern stage, a postmodern stage. Some people keep going, and nobody really knows why. And I remember one time he said, well, karma could account for that. And I think there's some truth to that, is that, we come into this world on a stream of karma that, as they point out in here, a lot of these kids who are psychopaths come from really bad homes where they were tortured, tormented themselves. And many of them come from perfectly good homes, at least to all appearances. And so that's a mystery. And that, my answer to that is the procreant urge. We're just all programmed to grow, just like the flowers and the trees. And 6-year-olds grow into 9-year-olds. And it's, wow. What do you say about that? So a couple other things. The big red flag for childhood psychopathy is early violence. Most of the psychopaths I meet in prison have been in fights with teachers in elementary school or junior high, Keel says, one of the researchers. When I interview them, I'd say, what's the worst thing you did in school? And they'd say, I beat my teacher unconscious. You're like, that really happened? And it turns out that it's very common. And so they then talk about the brain science and how amazing it is that we can look into the brains and see the upper right-hand quadrant correlates to these, sort of phenomena of consciousness in the upper left-hand quadrant. And here's what he says. The first abnormality appears in the limbic systems. These are the psychopathic, I don't know if it's adults or children here, but at any rate. The first abnormality appears in the limbic system, particularly the amygdala. And these are the brain structures involved in, among other things, processing emotions. In a psychopath's brain, this area contains less gray matter. It's like a weaker muscle, Keel says. A psychopath may understand intellectually that what he's doing is wrong, but he doesn't feel it. And that's really interesting. He says, for example, many psychopathic adults and callous children do not recognize fear or distress in other people's faces. And they talk about this one experiment where they were showing people, these psychopathic people, different faces and facial expressions. And when the prisoner came to a fearful face, he said, I don't know what you call this emotion, but it's what people look like just before you stab them. So, they're actually missing a piece of the antenna, and we can see it in the upper right, the meat of their brains. And that, starts to melt my condemnation and my sort of judgment of evil. This is another disability. It's a dangerous one because they estimate that psychopaths, although 1% of the population, commit over half of the violent crime. So, getting a handle on this and actually seeing that there are ways to make it, to treat it, is really important. And so here's where you get into the part that's interesting. Psychopaths not only fail to recognize distress in others, they might not feel it in themselves as well. And as a result, they don't respond to punishment. And all of these kids were punished and time out and, all of the punishments that we have, of solitary confinement, all of it, removal of privileges. One researcher says, if you're less concerned about the negative consequences of your actions, you're more likely to continue engaging them. I guess that's obvious. Okay, so anyway, this insight about punishment not working is driving a new wave of treatment. And at this treatment center in Austin, the Mendota Center, it's the center's real breakthrough, as they say, in deploying the anomalies of the psychopathic brain to their advantage. Specifically, they downplay punishments and they dangle rewards. And it turns out that these kids, while they're not particularly responsive to punishment, they love rewards. They love attention. They love, collecting things. They love having the biggest and best. They talk about at Mendota, the boys can accumulate points to join ever more prestigious clubs, the Club 19, the Club 23, the VIP Club. As they ascend in status, they earn privileges and treats, candy bars, baseball cards, pizza on Saturday, the chance to play Xbox or stay up late. Now, hitting somebody, throwing urine, or cussing out the staff may cost the boy points, but not for long, since callous and unemotional kids are generally deterred by punishment. And the interviewer talks about going to visit one of these kids, a 17-year-old boy with a nascent mustache. And she says, he fans out his collection of basketball cards and says, this is like 50 basketball cards, he says, and I can almost see his reward centers glowing, she says. He said, I have the most and best basketball cards out there. Does any of this sound familiar? Anyway, let's see. So just some statistics on how this treatment works. So they had a group of kids who just went to the regular juvenile correction facilities, and then the same number of kids who went through the Mendota Center. And here's the results. In the 4.5 years since their release, the Mendota boys have been far less likely to reoffend, 64% versus 97%. 64% doesn't seem great to me, but it's a heck of a lot better than 97. And far less likely to commit violent crime, 36% versus 60%. Most striking, the ordinary delinquents have killed 16 people. There was 140 of them. 16 people they've killed since their release. The boys from Mendota, not one. So basically what they're trying to do, and I'll just read it. He said, we're not trying to get these kids to go from the Joker in the Dark Knight to Mr. Rogers, but they can develop a cognitive moral conscience. They're not feeling it. They got the words, but not the music, but still they got the words. He says it's an intellectual awareness that life will be more rewarding if they play by the rules. And in our world, that's huge. So they followed this Carl along, and he's the one who bit his mother and felt deep fulfillment and joy. And he found God. And as they say, he falls short of the Christian ideal, but he attends church every week. And of course, this is a standard developmental move, is that you organize the chaos of the egocentric world, which is what we call the red stage of development, by moving into the amber, the spiral dynamics blue, the traditionalist stage of development, where all power is given to God, and you kind of don't have to take care of yourself in the same way anymore. And that's, a time-honored strategy for civilizing violent people. And it's so interesting to me that he became an undertaker. And he, as they say here, Carl cheerfully admits that the death business appeals to him. As a child, he says, I had a deep fascination with knives and cutting and stealing. So it's knives and cutting and killing, if only killing. So it's a harmless way to express some level of what you might call morbid curiosity. And I think that morbid curiosity, taken to its extreme, that's the home of serial killers, okay? So it's the same energy, but everything in moderation. So a happy ending for Carl and some hope for these kids who have a disability that is scary and dangerous, and one that we want to just, I used to joke that psychopaths are people too. I'm actually beginning to realize it. And so that's helpful. I can drop that I-it relationship with them, even though they may still have it with me. So I don't know how that works, but working on it. So, back to Trump. There's no reason in his history to think that he's murderous in the way that these, extreme kids are. But there's no doubt that he's on some spectrum of lack of empathy, callousness, and he clearly responds to rewards more than he does punishment. I mean, I've never seen anybody create more trouble for himself, including, the Mueller investigation into his Russian ties and everything else. Than him, simply because he had an impulse to fire Comey and creates all kinds of trouble for himself. But the trouble doesn't bother him. I mean, I see some of the trouble that he gets himself in, and I think, how could he stand it? And it doesn't seem to bother him. And this is that, what we just heard about with these callous kids. Punishment's not the way to go. It's rewards. And, you know, it's fun to read some of the childhood stories of Trump. He was, you know, clearly a bully, but basically garden variety, again, not murderous. He's the kid, his sister talks about how he threw his own birthday cake at a seven-year-old party, you know, just causing trouble and grief and enjoying it and seeing the dismay of others and not having it be a problem. One of his childhood neighbors, this is from the Washington Post, I'll read it, Dennis Burnham, 4 years younger, said that Donald was known to be a bully in the neighborhood. He told the story of his mother. The mother told him the story of the time when she left him in a playpen, left this Dennis kid in his playpen in the backyard, was adjoining the Trump's property. And as she looked out and saw Donald was standing at the fence using his playpen for target practice, throwing stones at the playpen. And Donald spent enough time in detention that his buddies nicknamed the punishment the DTs, for short for Donald Trump. So again, immune to punishment, but likes the rewards. He wrote a poem in his fifth grade yearbook. I like to hear the crowd give cheers so loud and noisy to my ears, because he was a star baseball player. And he liked to hear the crowd give cheers so loud and noisy to his ears. This is one that's a little bit maybe more troublesome. In his book, The Art of the Deal, Trump himself relates the story of giving his music teacher a black eye. So, you know, these kids in this program, you know, knocked their teachers out. And he gave his teacher a black eye. Why? Because, quote, I didn't think he knew anything about music. So at any rate, he was enough of a worry, even to his parents, who are possibly also cut from his same cloth, particularly his dad. I think there's, you know, a lot known about that. His dad hated losers and really loved killers, is how he put it. You got to be a killer. But even they were sufficiently worried about Donald that they sent him, I guess, suddenly to a military academy when he was 14. And he, by all accounts, did well there. And again, this is like accepting Jesus as your personal savior. Going to a military academy is a time-honored way of civilizing an out-of-control kid. And so he actually did well, and apparently he got civilized. Now, they do use a lot of punishment there. And again, they interviewed his drill sergeant. He was not that, you know, he's still kind of immune to the punishment. But as his drill sergeant said, he wanted to be number one. He wanted to be noticed. He wanted to be recognized. And I think this is a strange thing to remember all these many years later, but he says, and he liked compliments. So then, you know, Donald becomes a young adult, and, you know, his exploits at this point are legion. But there's a couple that just sort of stick out to me that I've heard over the year. It seems like years, but years. He said that one time he went with his dad to the dedication of the Verrazano Narrows Bridge in New York. His dad was a big real estate developer. And it was a big celebration. And he said, I noticed that no one paid homage to the 85-year-old Swedish designer who had traveled from Europe for the occasion of the dedication. The designer just wasn't getting enough homage. And Trump said, this is what he told his biographer. He said, I realized then and there that if you let people treat you how they want, you're being made a fool. I'll say that again. I realized then and there that if you let people treat you how they want, you're being made a fool. I mean, imagine thinking that. You know, I actually want people to treat me the way they want. I want them to want to treat me well. But the idea of letting them treat me the way they want to. So you're basically, and this is Trump, and this is egocentric, is, spends his days dominating the system, the group, the person that he's with. And I think that probably goes for his family too. Apparently it does from some of those stories. So, wow. So there's that. And then something that Rudy Giuliani said, and of course, Rudy Giuliani worked with Trump a good bit. He was mayor of New York when Donald Trump was one of the Playboys and Miss America pageant producers and all of that good stuff. And of course, real estate developers. And Rudy Giuliani said that he never saw anybody else who in a negotiation didn't just want to win, but he wanted the other guy to lose. So again, that feeling of the pleasure of inflicting pain is, just remarkable. And I used to teach negotiation, and of course, the idea among negotiators these days is win-win. Find out what the other person wants and help them get it so that you can get what you want, and if everybody gets a bigger pie. And that's a modernist way of viewing things, because it's just one of the realizations of modernity is that, wait a second, fighting is just beating us both up. Why don't we trade and do things together and create together? And he didn't make that leap. So then the question is he growing? I have to think that the sheer karma of that office is bringing something online. I do. There are a couple things. The night he won, he was interviewed, and one of the reporters asked him if he wanted to do the thing that he promised the whole campaign, which was to prosecute Hillary Clinton for her emails. And his answer was, I don't want to hurt those people. And I thought, oh, maybe Donald Trump does have a good bone in his body. And of course, he's it's not how he's acting now. He wants to hurt Hillary plenty and does. But I thought, this is where states come in handy. He just won the presidency. He had a state experience, and it included love. And there was a couple times when I saw him talking about God. He's working with the evangelicals, and I actually got the feeling that he sort of felt what he was talking about. But who knows? Maybe everybody can grow. That's sort of one of the things that I think an assumption we want to make in Integral. But again, having me see him not as just a big, what Hillary called him, a back off, you creep, big creep, which is kind of how I feel. That's sort of my orange self. I'm repulsed by it, literally. I can now, knowing him, this is how I differentiate. We would always want to see more. That's the definition of development is. So we want to just see more components, turn that Google map up. That I can see that he's missing a piece of his antenna. It helps me forgive him. It helps me not hate him. It doesn't help me resist him. I mean, it doesn't mean I can't resist him. In fact, maybe it makes me more effective at resisting him because I've lost some of my sort of magical thinking. I think this idea of rewards, not punishments, is actually extra dangerous with him because, Rob Smith in one of his pieces said that he predicted that Trump would start a war before the 2020 election. Of course, that's a time-honored strategy for a president to have a bump in his approval ratings. And, we know how Donald Trump loves that. And so there would be a reward for him in that. Normally the fear of that is what keeps people from doing that. And Trump has said in the past, why can't we use our nuclear weapons? He's asked the generals. So, I used to think that that wasn't possible. But I think that a little less now, having understood this, sort of world that people who have callousness and a lack of empathy live in. So that's that for today. Corey, you told me to keep it to 15 minutes, and it was close. Hey, I wanted to also say for everybody that thank you very much for Integral Life, just for being there and doing your good work, and for inviting me on. And I want to point out the What Now conference that's coming up over New Year's here in Denver. And, Ken's going to be there. A lot of cool people are going to be there. I'm going to be there. And it's a really, really fun event. It's sort of the next version of the What Next conference, if you came to that. So you can check it out on Integral Life under What Now. Correct, Corey? Anything else I need to say about that?
Yeah, if you want to know more about What Now, you can just go to integrallife.com/events. You'll see it listed there, along with other upcoming webinars with Jeff Salzman and Keith Witt. It should be the very first thing on the page.
All right. Well, I think that's it for today. So
yeah, Jeff, I did have one sort of sad piece of breaking news. I just received an email during the show from Ken Wilber. Apparently, Francis Vaughn passed away this weekend.
Oh.
Yeah, that's tremendously sad. So I just want to read a little bit, and I'm hoping we can take a moment of silence for Francis, who was absolutely an extraordinary woman. I never had the privilege of meeting her in person, sadly. But everything I've heard about her from Ken, and obviously, her impact on our friend Roger Walsh, she was a tremendous woman. So I just want to read a few words from Roger's email, just so that we can sort of celebrate her life together. Roger says, "Our beloved Frances died suddenly on Saturday evening. She was her usual lively, loving, joyful self throughout the day. But shortly after we arrived at a friend's house, she felt faint, short of breath, and had chest pain. We rushed her to the ER, but she suddenly deteriorated and lost consciousness. A CAT scan revealed a massive aortic artery dissection, a tear. Fortunately, her two children, Bob and Leslie, made it to the ER in time to be with her before she passed, and she was surrounded by loving family and dear friends. She was by any standard a truly remarkable woman. She raised two children and loved 5 grandchildren while offering a full-time psychotherapy practice, and was widely regarded as one of the world's foremost transpersonal therapists. She published 7 books and over 100 articles, and was president of both the Humanistic and Transpersonal Psychology Associations. Recently, she was on the board of the philanthropic Fetzer Institute and also on the council of Spring Lake Village, where she lived. But what were most remarkable were her personal qualities and interpersonal skills. She was, as Ken Wilber wrote in a foreword to one of her books, the wisest of wise women, and her deepest value was love. Extraordinary wisdom and love, what a combination. On her last day, a friend asked about her spiritual practice, and she replied, as she had for many months, I'm practicing gratitude. She was my priceless life partner, best friend, beloved, and teacher for over 40 years. I'm glad to have told her many times that she was the great gift of my life. I'm trying to bring her teachings to her loss and to practice gratitude in the midst of shock and grief for the time we had together and the time she had with you. Her children and I would like to have a memorial for her, but it's too early to say when. Thank you for your contributions to her life. I'm grateful for the many wonderful friends she had, and to know that her benevolent influence will continue to ripple out into the world through her writings, recordings, and through you."
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, blessings to you, Francis, on your journey. We really loved knowing you.
Yeah, and you as well, Roger. We're holding you.
Indeed.
Yeah.
All right. So how can people check this out after, if they're not making it live?
Yeah. So in just a couple hours, I'm going to post this up on YouTube, and I'll start circulating the link on Facebook. I'll also post it to Integral Life. You should be able to find that on the Integral Life homepage. And yeah, it should be a little bit later this afternoon. It takes a few hours to get the file and re-upload it and all that good stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess we'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, Jeff, this was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Same time, same station.
Sounds good.
All right, gang. See you
All right,
then.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.